Good afternoon. It's Friday the 20th of May 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host Mike Robinson, and joining me Patrick Hankinson from 21st Century Wire. Thanks for joining me again, Pat.
My pleasure, Mike.
Well, we're going to get straight into it, and we're going to discuss MS-804. The Express yesterday saying, or this morning saying that Fear's jet will never be found as explosion ruled out. Now, of course, we know that the Egyptian army is now saying that they have found some, what they're describing as wreckage, but it remains to be seen exactly what they have found. It is the behaviour of this aircraft is a bit unusual. It sort of reminds me of Germanwings, Pat, with contact not possible with the flight deck and strange manoeuvres in the sky.
Sure. Not only that, it's the exact same aircraft, Airbus A320, I believe. Same aircraft as the Germanwings flight. A lot of similarities there, with all the high-tech communications and the amount of fitting and technology that goes into these aircrafts today, more than ever before. I find it quite extraordinary, if not unbelievable, that there can be such a lack of communication, and we can have a commercial airliner disappear in thin air, not once, but twice now so far. I'm sure something will turn up. I mean, the Mediterranean Ocean isn't exactly the Indian Ocean in terms of its size and scale. Quite unbelievable that you could lose a plane in such a small space. This is going to fuel different theories, and it's going to fuel skepticism. But all these planes, Airbus and Boeing, are fitted with, at least according to the patents that we've researched, an uninterruptible autopilot, or what the media often refer to as fly-by-wire technology. Okay, so as this is standard, it's impossible, really in my mind anyway, that anybody could lose contact or lose sight of an airplane, if not lose control of it. And there's also a number of pings that are standard on many systems, at least a half a dozen systems on any modern aircraft. That includes Rolls-Royce engines, live ping status reports going back and forth to the manufacturer, and similar to OnStar technology in automobiles. And also the air conditioning, oxygen systems, just checking performance and with the manufacturers. And just about every made system on the plane has that. So again, it's not just a transponder. There's a number of pings that can be used to triangulate the location of an airliner in today's world. So we're meant to believe by these media reports that it just vanished into thin air. Quite extraordinary.
I find it incredible that any mainstream newspaper suggesting that this aircraft would disappear and never be found, particularly in the Mediterranean.
Yeah. You can't even lose an automobile. These days,
Yeah.
How can you lose a commercial airliner?
Yes, well, I think we'll leave it there for now. Now, we mentioned a couple of days ago Michael Fallon meeting the president of Georgia. He's meeting lots of people at the moment, doing a grand tour. Well, this particular meeting's in London, but he has met his counterpart, the Defence Secretary of Romania, and of course, with further EU military integration. This is yet another example of the diplomacy that's going on behind that. So we've got him meeting his Romanian counterpart. He has praised Mr. Motok over Romania's recent increase in defence spending, because apparently we've all got to be spending 2% on defence within this European Army framework, and within NATO, in fact. They are praising Romania's cooperation with various exercises, including Exercise Sarmas, and we're going to see personnel from 3 rifles working alongside Romanian and US counterparts, and this is part of NATO's assurance measures in in Eastern Europe. So no pressure against Russia there, and they are also sending personnel to Romania to contribute to Exercise Steadfast Cobalt, which is from April to June, and that's apparently going to validate the NATO Response Force 17 command and control elements. And we've also got Royal Naval cooperation as well, and also RAF Typhoons participating in the Bucharest Air Show, although that's less important. We're increasing European military ties, and of course, as we've been pointing out, this isn't going to change even if we leave the European Union following a referendum.
I think what we've got here, Mike, is we're one major, potentially one major crisis away, one major military incident away, one terrorist attack or migrant incident away from the hard call publicly to help galvanize the security of Europe under a new EU army. And I know a lot of pundits might have poo-pooed this 6 months ago, but we've been researching this for a very long time, and we have seen all the signs, and everything seems to be congealing towards this conclusion of an EU army, essentially, not just to protect the borders of Europe, but in my mind, Mike, my opinion, this is to keep Europe together by establishing this force. This literally is the cement that holds Europe together in the face of any referendums or any political activity to create a union of security. This is effectively the mission of an EU defense force.
Absolutely, that's absolutely right. And as we pointed out in recent weeks, senior military sources telling us that the EU military command and control structures are in place and can be activated within 24 hours already. They're at that point where within 24 hours they could have the whole lot switched on.
Yeah, see, NATO is a damaged brand. It's redundant in so many ways, and so it's just ripe to be replaced by something.
Yes.
But also, you have to look at the defense manufacturing sector. Britain will play a central role in the manufacturing, the distribution of various systems through our main contractors here to all of these clients, essentially.
Yep.
So France and Britain and Germany would be the leading defense contractor nations, but would have a near monopoly actually on all defense contracting, and that's going out to every EU country. So and the more the merrier, Mike. The more EU countries you have, the more clients for this commercial sector.
And that is probably what Fallon's meetings with all these various people are about. And right on cue, the Daily Mail today, this is really an advertisement, isn't it, for the British defence industry? And here we have them suggesting that enemies will think twice about war with Britain when the biggest ever Royal Navy ship sets sail in 2020. Now, of course, this is one of our 2 new aircraft carriers. It demonstrates that we still have a manufacturing capability in this country. It's rapidly being lost, but it's unfortunate that we choose to be manufacturing death and destruction rather than something productive. Nonetheless, we still have an engineering and manufacturing capability. It's also unfortunate, perhaps, that the aircraft that are going to be flying from this, if they ever fly, is the F-35B.
B stands for boondoggle.
Right.
Right? Yeah. F-35B.
Yes. So I think you're absolutely right in your comments, and this article really reinforces that. I
think another thing is to invest so much in naval power. It's a bit of a misnomer today in so many ways, or anachronism, whatever you want to call it, anathema. But to park a ship off of a country's coast who has an S-300 or an S-400 or a Sunburn missile system, naval power is purely for projection now. It doesn't really have much use in real military terms in the 21st century, like air power does, and like other smart power, for instance, as well. So again, it's just for show, high-ticket item, very impressive at the arms show. Yeah.
Yes. Well, speaking of NATO, there was a NATO ministers meeting yesterday, and it's continuing today actually, and they are in fact talking about the relationship between NATO and the European Union and the EU army. So they're saying that they're going to continue to cooperate with the EU on hybrid threats and on migration. They're going to cooperate so Jens Stoltenberg said, I foresee a joint statement on NATO-EU relations. It will identify key areas for expanding our cooperation, including fighting hybrid and cyber threats, supporting our partners in defence capacity building, and increasing maritime security. So this is before the foreign ministers' meeting on cooperation with the European Union. He went on to say that NATO and the EU share 22 member states, and more than 90% of the EU population live in a NATO country. And he said we both work together we both work better when we work together. He said our policy is clear. The two pillars of our engagement with Russia are defence and dialogue. So this is a bit like the IRA, isn't it, where they had a political wing and a military wing. So he's saying that NATO's attitude here is to have a two-pillar approach: defence and dialogue. It's the same model. Especially in times of tension, it is important to keep lines of dialogue open and seek more transparency.
Well, they're talking about fighting hybrid wars. But if you really look at what's happening in the world, especially in the Middle East, Europe is waging hybrid warfare. Weapons of mass migration, which are a direct result of NATO or US-led coalition, effectively NATO foreign policy. And fighting proxy wars, funding and arming guerrilla factions on the ground, which we'll talk about in the next segment.
Yes. Right. Well, let's move on to Israel, because not all is well there. And this is Moshe Yaalon, who was the defense minister until yesterday, I think. And he has made a pretty scathing attack on Benjamin Netanyahu. He has said that, well, as you can see, it's to his great sorrow that extremist and dangerous parties have taken over Israel and the Likud party and are shaking the foundations and threatening to hurt its residents. He said, sadly, senior politicians in the country have chosen the way of incitement and segregation between parts of Israeli society instead of unifying it and bringing it together. It is unbearable to me that we will be divided among us out of cynicism and lust for control, and I expressed my opinion on the matter more than once out of honest concern for the future of society in Israel and the future of next generations. So his resignation is just ahead of negotiations between Netanyahu and the Yisrael Beitenu, I do apologize for my pronunciation of that party leader, Avigdor Lieberman. So there is Mr. Lieberman, and as Ynet here is pointing out, they're hoping to have those negotiations complete by today. And this will mean that Lieberman's party will be brought into the coalition. And clearly, Mr. Yaalon wasn't terribly happy about this. So they're hoping to have those negotiations finished today. But you published an article not so long ago on Lieberman. He doesn't seem to be a terribly nice guy.
No, I would class Lieberman as an extremist. And in this article, in this story, which we published in 2015, I think last spring, he threatened all of the Arab Israelis. There are a certain percentage of the population in Jerusalem that have Arabs with an Israeli passport. In other words, they've fallen inside Israeli borders. And Lieberman's saying if they don't, basically swear allegiance to Tel Aviv and vote and act the right way in terms of the representation, government, and so forth, they should be beheaded. Behead all the Arabs if they don't behave. Basically, this is essentially what he said, and that was actually from the Israeli press, where we wrote a commentary on that article. So that's in the Israeli press. So not a nice character, and definitely an extremist. Not a fan of the native Palestinian population. Would like to see them, I don't know, disappear or move on somewhere. So that's kind of a disturbing development that he would be in line for such a high position.
Yes.
In the Israeli government.
Yes.
So.
Okay, we watch that with interest. And in the meantime, the United Nations suggesting or saying that the credibility of the next round of Syrian peace talks is at risk without a renewed truce and access for humanitarian aid. What are your thoughts on this type of rhetoric out of the United Nations?
I've commented extensively on this for a long time. I've always seen the ceasefire plan in Syria as a two-level thing where you've got the diplomats in Geneva and places like this, or at the UN, who are doing real diplomacy, or trying anyway. In the case of John Kerry, pretending to be trying. But what they're really doing as far as the US goes and its allies, they're using the ceasefire to buy time to reestablish the rat lines for their proxy armies on the ground, be they al-Nusra or in the case of Ahrar al-Sham, and all these terrorist groups, the Islamic Front type groups. Army of Conquest, I think, is one of the umbrella organizations there.
But they still deny that Ahrar al-Sham is a terrorist organization?
Correct. So this is this policy of commingling terrorist groups and saying that these are terrorists, admitting that al-Nusra is a terrorist. By the way, that's the most dominant group in numbers in Syria, more than ISIS. So a little news flash to the mainstream media. This outnumbers ISIS fighters. So if you're in America or you're in Europe and you think ISIS is the biggest, baddest terrorist group in Syria, it's not. This has been overinflated by the media in order to create a kind of paper tiger. So what's happening on the ground is totally different.
And al-Nusra absolutely a Saudi creation?
Yes, yeah, from the beginning. You can go ahead and research that and clearly see that. But what the U.S. are doing, the State Department are using, so in effect they're saying Ahrar al-Sham is not a terrorist group, or we're not sure if they're a terrorist group, but al-Nusra is, but they're side by side, so this should be a no bombing zone or a ceasefire zone, because we might hit the good terrorists and maybe, but when we're trying to hit the bad terrorists. So they're using terrorists as human shields. The State Department is using terrorists as human shields to protect other terrorists. If you want to boil it down, that's exactly what's happening. So this is kind of a sleight of hand being played by the State Department, but a lot of people see right through it. And I don't think they'll be able to hold that facade up for very long. This is just like another Band-Aid measure on a failing ground game in Syria.
Well, the UN saying, obviously, we're in a clear hurry to start reintroducing the next round of inter-Syrian talks. But the message is clear. If we don't have the atmosphere conducive for increasing the cessation of hostilities and a substantial improvement on humanitarian access, then the credibility of the next round of talks will be in question.
And again, there's the humanitarian, throwing the humanitarian card out.
Yeah.
And by backing these terrorist groups or protecting them or giving them some sort of air of legitimacy, which the U.S. and its allies are doing, they're prolonging the humanitarian disaster. They're expanding the humanitarian disaster. The blood is on their hands for any subsequent deaths. They could have wiped out ISIS. They could wipe out this terrorist cancer in Syria in a matter of weeks. And this could have been done 18 months ago.
Yeah.
But instead, because of this diplomacy or this facade of diplomacy, it's allowed to continue. And it will continue for years to come if they maintain these policies.
Right, political correctness in the EU. Now, we wanted to highlight this article on 21st Century War because it's written by Branko Malic. He's a real find.
Branko is a writer from Europe, based in Croatia, but he has incredible insights in terms of globalism and the idea of the language of sustainability, as he called it in many interviews, and also has a great idea of knowledge in NGOs, how they're managed and what their roles are. This is a very interesting story here. So we have the European statute, or the European Commission, I believe, on tolerance and reconciliation.
Yeah.
And the chairman of this is none other than Tony Blair. So it's good that Tony is back in gainful employment, that he's heading the European Commission on Tolerance and Reconciliation. The Palestinians are baffled when they announced this. They couldn't believe it. They said, why have they put Tony Blair in charge of the Reconciliation European Committee? But what they've done is they've drafted a model for a European statute for the promotion of human rights. And included in this is this idea of tolerance. Okay, so what it is essentially is just trying to protect groups and anybody, and to legislate tolerance. So this is really legislating thought in many ways.
Yes.
When you boil down to it, and so you can't slander groups, and who knows who could be included in this group. And I find it amazing. We'll look at this fantastic image here. So this is what really kicked off this initiative, or gave it the the PR boost that it required, the Charlie Hebdo
Yeah.
attacks in January 2015. And so there was this call, European-wide call for tolerance. And of course, you can see the cast of characters here. You've got monarchs, you've got despots, you've got people there who are guilty and wanted for war crimes in some cases. They're all there alongside Europe's elite. And so, Jordan, for instance, you got the King of Jordan and Queen Rania there. Jordan ranks 153rd out of 180 in terms of press freedom. Then you also have the Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, I think he might have been in there somewhere. They routinely arrest journalists, imprison them, disappear them in some cases. You've got Saudi ambassadors there in that crowd. This is a client of Europe, or Europe's a client of Saudi, I'm not sure. Bahrain, the Gabon, all these, Benjamin Netanyahu. We don't need to say much about him that people who watch the show probably aren't already familiar with, but suffice to say, this is who Europe does business with.
Yes.
And so what they do is do business with some of the worst people in the international community, and at home are trying to legislate thought crime and groupthink,
Yeah.
which is essentially what this is. So this is prescribing a good thought and how we should view groups. So I wonder if Ukraine is absorbed into the EU, will the neo-Nazis be protected? Should we be tolerant for the street thugs in Kiev? Or should we be tolerant towards ISIS? Should we be more sensitive towards the needs of ISIS? Because they could be protected. If Turkey is folded into the EU, then this is going to Turkey's jurisdiction
Absolutely.
included here. So, and there's lots of ISIS fighters in Turkey. So maybe Brussels wants us to be more sensitive and more to their needs, and not to hurt the feelings of ISIS. Because after all, what are
Maybe they need a hug.
Maybe they need a hug. I didn't bring my hoodie today. Next time.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. TTIP. TTIP campaigners applaud Tory Eurosceptics for joining Jeremy Corbyn in opposing the trade deal. So what's this about? It's basically hands off the NHS. The campaigners are saying the NHS and all our public services must be protected from TTIP. To do this, we must reject all of this secret deal. Well, this is laudable. They're saying that campaign groups and unions have applauded Tory Eurosceptics for uniting with Jeremy Corbyn in an attempt to derail TTIP. It turns out that in fact that has been quite successful, because the government has recognised that if Tory Eurosceptics and Corbyn's team get together, that they would be defeated. So the government spokesperson has said today, as we said all along, there will be no threat to the NHS from TTIP. So if the amendment is selected, we will accept it. So they have caved in on that one. But the campaign in general, I was a little uncomfortable with, and people shouldn't take this as too much of a criticism, because of course we should be campaigning against TTIP. But I felt that it does two things. First of all, it doesn't highlight the fact that the NHS is being privatised. It has largely been privatised, and that what's left of the NHS is equivalent to the bad bank in the good bank, bad bank scenario that we got after 2008. So all the juicy low-hanging fruit has all been sold off or sent out to private corporations, and the rest is what's being left. So as a result, the deficits in England's NHS health trusts for 2015-16 have totaled £2.4 billion, and it was £0.8 billion in 2014-15. So the deficits within the NHS getting worse by the day, while more and more private companies move in and start feeding off the good parts of the NHS. So I felt that it was, people have got to keep their minds on this fact. It also diverts attention, in a sense, from TTIP itself, because while the War on Want spokesman was saying that we should be fighting TTIP on every level, focusing on the NHS is tantamount to saying, well, actually TTIP's okay, I'm speaking about in most people's minds. It's tantamount to saying that TTIP is okay, just keep the NHS out of it. We've got to make sure that everybody recognises that TTIP is not okay on any level, and we should be keeping out of it altogether. But unfortunately, as I'll remind everybody once again, TTIP is a central part of British government trade policy. We are pushing it harder than any other country. So this campaign needs to get a bit of momentum behind it, not focus on a single issue of the NHS.
Yeah, and you pointed out what you pointed out earlier is true. This is in the problem reaction solution of selling off public assets. One of the biggest Hegelian seeds in that equation is to plunge a public service into debt, or plunge departments so that mandarins will make their case of, well, it's just too expensive. The private sector can do it much cheaper. And that debt can be avoided very easily, I think, down to mismanagement or intentionally bloating a lot of public services with pork. And making them ripe for the slaughter for privatization, which I think is probably what we're looking at with the NHS.
Absolutely. Now, an interesting article here from Visual Capitalist. The shift to a cashless society is snowballing. I think we all know this anyway, but I'll just give a couple of points from this. They're pointing out that the Federal Reserve estimates that there will be $616.9 billion in cashless transactions in 2016, and that's up from $60 billion in 2010. So that's pretty exponential growth in the last 5 or 6 years. They're pointing out that in Sweden, about 59% of all consumer transactions are cashless, that hard currency makes up just 2% of the economy. But they're pointing out that in Germany, there are much stronger proponents of cash. So they're also making the point about the proposal to eliminate the €500 note and capping all transactions at €5,000, which was made in Germany in February by a junior partner in the coalition government. Well, I mean, we were discussing this earlier, Patrick, and the main problem for people is going to be the fact that they can't even buy a bar of soap without the government knowing about it.
Yeah, cashless society, more than anything, it robs the citizen of anonymity in making its purchases, and also it can be used very easily to not only track what they buy, but to track movement as well. And so this is what you get with the cashless society. I'm not saying that all cashless applications are bad. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies offer a level of anonymity for the users. But unfortunately, this sort of cashless society you're talking about is the one which is being run through a cartel of financial institutions in conjunction with central government.
So absolutely, identity tracking, what are you buying, when are you buying it, where are you buying it? Well, this is all part and parcel of the drive to know what everybody's doing. The surveillance is incredible. So let me introduce you to Verify, which is the government's mechanism for identifying who you are when you use government services. Now, this has been developed by the government. It has been being beta tested recently, and it has just gone live today. So the way that it works is that you set up an account with a verified provider, and that is certified company, as they're being called. So here are a list of typical uses that you can access via Verify. HMRC, of course, Department of Work and Pensions, so state pension is going to be attached to it, universal credit going to be attached to it. There's going to be no option to access these types of services. So if you're on some kind of benefit, you must access it this way. You're effectively forced into this. Claims for redundancy, monies owed, self-assessment tax returns, rural payments, pensions, the works. You can see it there, mostly HMRC related. And these are the list of certified companies that you have to identify via. So you are not being identified directly with the government. You must identify yourself to one of these organizations, and then it is these organizations that act as gateways to the government services. So government is sharing data with the likes of Experian and Verizon and Royal Mail and we are the guinea pigs in the middle, it seems.
Well, the government has licensed these companies to perform, to be the window, if you will, into government services. So this is a cartel of companies here who effectively have a monopoly on this. Yeah, it's...
So they're saying it's safe because information is not stored centrally. There's no unnecessary sharing of information, is what they say. The company that you choose, they say, doesn't know which service you're trying to access, and the government department doesn't know which company you're choosing.
Technocracy. This is the technocracy.
Absolutely.
This is the corporate lair. This is the corporate state, the face of the corporate state.
So we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll see how many data breaches there are over the next 3 or 4 years. Okay, a subject we haven't been able to had a chance to speak about yet since you've been here has been the presidential election, and I thought we would introduce that through this article. It's a few days old. Hillary Clinton holding $100,000 a head fundraisers, and who's she doing this with? Well, a number of small, intimate gatherings. Maureen White and Stephen Ratner, they hosted one of these, and Lynn Forrester de Rothschild hosted another one. So right within the banking sector, clearly she's going to do nothing about the banks, but $100,000 a head. That would be that's a good deal if you can get it.
Yeah. So this is where the power is in the establishment, in the Democratic establishment, and of course Wall Street. Very good friends of the Clintons, and so Wall Street will empty their pockets for this campaign more than they will for the billionaire Donald Trump, because he doesn't need their money.
Yeah.
He's got his own money. So there's the paradigm.
Where's it going to end? Is she going to win?
In November. It's too early to tell. It's too early to tell. There's a lot of scandals brewing. Bernie Sanders has made an incredible surge in the last 2 months. So I wouldn't write him off, right even to the convention. There's possible superdelegates could change their pledge towards a Bernie Sanders, who we'll see what happens in California. I was in California a few weeks ago, Mike, and all I saw in Los Angeles anyway was Bernie in the windows, in the yards, of the bumper stickers. Bernie. And so we'll see. He will collect a lot of delegates in California. We'll see how much, if there's a big majority or not. But Silicon Valley is absolutely behind, it seems to me, behind Hillary Clinton. And so I think the big shots in Hollywood are, the little shots in Hollywood are behind Sanders. So.
I mean, how does this work in terms of who actually becomes the official candidate?
Well, they'll go to convention this summer. I think it's in July. At least the Republican convention is going to be in July in Cleveland, and I think the Democratic convention's around the same time. They'll go there. There'll be a vote on the floor. The delegates will be there, and there'll be a series of votes. The rules are different between parties, but they will decide their nominee there. So we'll see what happens.
So we've had this whole range of votes so far, and does it absolutely guarantee that if Sanders won a particular primary, that he's going to get those delegates voting for him at the convention?
Maybe on the first vote, or in terms of in the Republican side, on the first vote, yes. If it goes to a second vote, they can switch votes. So our system is far from democratic. Unfortunately, it's a lot of horse trading and a lot of wheeling and dealing. The Democrat Party has the super delegates, which is the most undemocratic concept. And those were put in place to kill any insurgent candidates. So that was implemented in the early 80s to make sure that no outsider could ever surge and get the nomination. So that's what Bernie Sanders is up against on the Democratic side.
Right.
So,
well, we watch with interest. Okay. Guardian here reporting the Goddard inquiry. We don't hear too much about the Goddard inquiry in the media, but the police are expecting 30,000 new child abuse reports, and apparently what is going to happen is that the police are just going to be swamped with child abuse reports for the next lot of years. 100 cases a month. It's not possible for them to cope with that. This gives a clue as to the scale of this thing, and really this is another form of cover-up, isn't it? Where you basically swamp the investigators.
Yeah, this is swarming. But what you can see in terms of a problem, reaction, solution, what would likely come out of this, Mike, is the announcement or the formation of a new NGO or charities being given the work of investigating some of these claims. So it could be like the NSPCC or something, be awarded the contracts or whatever, the responsibility, as it were, to investigate this. So that's what I can see coming out of this story.
Yes.
So that's an expansion of government responsibilities into the third sector. So problem, reaction, solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to end up with, this. I do apologize for it. But this is in the Telegraph, and I thought it was quite obscene in a sense, because what they're talking about is people that are having stomach problems from Clostridium difficile. I apologize for the pronunciation of that. 13,000 people a year suffering from that. What is this? This is, according to the Telegraph, a condition which appears to be a side effect of antibiotics. So what we've got is people being given multiple rounds of antibiotics because maybe they've gone in with a problem. They're given one set of antibiotics that don't work. They're put on another set of antibiotics and ever stronger until they get to the point where their guts are completely destroyed. And as a result, they end up with a pretty nasty condition. And it's a condition which they say if you introduce other microorganisms into the bowel, that the infection seems to subside. So their solution is to create a bank of frozen poo, which they will then use to medicate people afterwards.
What will they do? Put it in a capsule or something?
Well, I'm assuming that. I mean, they've got to find some way to make it deliverable.
So there's a total overprescription of antibiotics. Yeah. If you speak to anybody, everyone's all, even people you meet every day, Mike, they'll say, "Oh, are you feeling sick? Have you got I've got a touch of the flu. Oh, you need to get some antibiotics." How many times have you heard that over the last 2 decades? So overprescription of antibiotics, that's the problem. The reaction is, a gut crisis, a GI, a gastrointestinal crisis, GI problem. And the solution from the NHS is this. So rather than a GI supplement, a good homeopathic supplement that could rebalance the gut, and maybe less prescription, don't get antibiotics for the flu or for a common cold, that could be a better solution. But instead we get this.
It does occur to me that I forgot to check whether it said April the 1st on the date of this article. I'm pretty sure it didn't, but
okay.
But you know, it does have that sort of air about it. It's an unusual solution to a problem which we've created for ourselves.
Yeah.
Somebody's making fun, I think.
Interesting.
Okay, on that depressing note, we will...
It's a terrible note to end on.
We will leave it for today, and we will see you again on Monday at the same time, 1 o'clock. I hope to see you then. Have a great weekend. Goodbye.